This is the lecture for Friday, the 28th of May, 2021. You all should have just taken the quiz on World War II and the final solution for the exam. I think I listed it as an exam. We start out. At the end of the war, a war like no other, there is a profound sense of shock. Now, after the first war, there was a sense of disappointment. And that disappointment and unfulfilled frustration about every aspect of the war led to the dangerously flawed Versailles Conference. After this war, there's not going to be a conference. No peace conference after World War II. Instead, Europe and sections of Asia have been bombed back to the Stone Age. No power, no water, no sewage, millions of unburied dead, tens of millions of dispos. Dispos are called displaced persons. These are people who no longer have homes or homelands, or who were forced to migrate or chose to migrate at the end of the war, for example, to avoid becoming part of the Russian area of occupation. The only economy in the world not fundamentally destroyed was the American economy. I think, asked that people keep one seat separate. So, well, you can stay there, Jack. Just slide over one. You can slide over two. That way you stay in the same thing. Or you can go. I don't care. I just need you one seat apart. The only economy not bombed back to the Stone Age was the United States. And we were the only people also who had the atom bomb. To those lovely modern people who look with suspicion upon America as just another imperial power, I say study 1945. Study what happened after the war. Had we wanted to, the free world could have been made into our colonies, as everywhere the Red Army went was made into part of the Soviet Empire. We didn't do that. Had we wanted to, everything from Canada to Greenland, Iceland, the British Isles, Britain, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, the English-speaking world certainly could have been ours in some kind of union with Britain. And that would have included India, although we probably would have get granted independence. But we also were in a position to take, because for the next decade or two we supported, and after that we still defend, Germany, France, Italy, Japan, South Korea. The list goes on. It is an insupportable argument to say that the United States is merely one more European-style empire, that all we're interested in is ruling other people. Because had we wanted to, we could have done it in 45, 46, 47, 48, and no one could have stopped us. The Russians could have kept us out of their zone. That's about it. The Russians had the most powerful army by far. However, we had a very powerful army too before we disbanded it. We also had the most powerful navy and air force in the world and the world had ever known. And again, I point out, we not only had atom bombs, we had an atom bomb production line. The peace after the war is dominated by the paranoia of Stalin And his desire to, as a consequence of that paranoia, and as an extension of Russian imperial policy, push the borders of Russian and Soviet power as far west as possible. With the exception of Austria, which was separated once again from Germany, everywhere that the Russian army, that the Red Army fought, they kept. Now, there were supposed to be democratic elections in Eastern Europe. To the extent they even happened, they were shams, accompanied by violence against opposition parties, disappearing of opposition party candidates, and violence against voters if they voted wrong, because the secret ballot idea, not fully applied under communism. The Soviets were also on the move here. Today, and frankly after the Cold War in general, it's become fashionable to laugh at the Red Scare. So easy to laugh at the Red Scare 60, 70 years later. The U.S. State Department was infiltrated by communist agents working for Soviet military intelligence, among them Alger Hiss, very well-connected, famous person who was instrumental in founding the UN. He was later exposed by the man on the far left next to the flag, Whittaker Chambers, as a Red agent. Julius and Ethel Rosenberg and Klaus Fuchs, members of the Manhattan Project, had smuggled secrets to the Soviets about the atom bomb. So it took until 1949 for the Soviets to develop their own atom bomb, because it took them a while to get the intelligence and do something with it. It's not easy to build the production line for atom bombs. There were agents in the Communist Party of the United States that were interested in destabilizing the American economy, disrupting the American polity, that is, causing strife between factions within this country, all to benefit Stalin and the expansion of Russian power. Joe McCarthy was an inarticulate SOB who later became a wild card, randomly spewing charges of communism. But what he started out saying was not false. There was a conspiracy within the United States to aid a foreign power, the Soviet Union, in overthrowing our way of life. And the leadership of the Communist Party USA was thrown in jail at this time, rightly so, because they were dedicated to the violent overthrow of the American system. That is treason. But it wasn't just the red threat. It was also the fear of the mushroom cloud. When an atom bomb, a fission bomb, like the bombs that were used on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, are dropped, they have the power to destroy the center of most small and medium-sized cities. You'd need several of them to even damage Moscow. It's huge, like Los Angeles. Big, spread-out city. But cities like Nagasaki in particular, that are surrounded by mountains, are perfect for the small-scale fission bombs. The bombs that hit Nagasaki and Hiroshima were about 15,000 tons of TNT equivalent. In one bomb, that's a mighty power. Again, you drop an atom bomb on the Coeur d'Alene Resort of the kind that was the Hiroshima bomb, the crater will go out to North Idaho College campus. The blast effects will go out as far as the Walmart in Hayden. Radiation will hit all of that area, plus anywhere downwind, depending upon how the wind is blowing, for a few hundred miles. It will not destroy the climate of the world. The world can absorb a few hydrogen bombs without losing the climate. But it's not good. Because of the fear of the atom bomb, and because of the opportunism of Stalin, what we're going to see in the after period of World War II is somebody who's willing to push things right up to the line, but not over the line. They want to get what they can take. It's like a local Democrat politician I once heard say, "We don't steal every election, but why on earth should we lose a close election?" So the games they played in that locality were not played in every single election, only the close ones. The Stalinist communist approach was to take whatever we left unprotected. And they were very good at it. So we learned to protect more and more and more. But the fear of the atom bomb and later the hydrogen bomb was something that kept people in line. Hydrogen bombs are not fission bombs created by the splitting of an atom. They are fusion bombs, using the same motive power that the sun uses. You smash atoms together. Most cases, hydrogen, because it's the simplest atom.
The science behind it is actually really interesting. You actually use a fission reaction. So
Yes.
you take like the basis of an atom bomb and use it to launch a section of uranium into another section of a different molecule. Most of the time it's hydrogen.
Mhm.
And then it fuses and then creates an even bigger explosion. So it's atomic bomb plus the other fusion explosion.
But like converting iron into steel, that process creates something out of proportion. A hydrogen bomb's power is not measured in kilotons, thousands of tons of TNT. Hydrogen bombs are usually measured in megatons, millions of tons of TNT. It's a quantum difference in power. If a typical hydrogen bomb, like you'd see on most nuclear missiles, nuclear tipped missiles, were dropped on the Coeur d'Alene resort, the crater would go out at least as far as the Walmart in Hayden. The blast effects would go out to Rathdrum, and the radiation would poison anything downwind for up to 800, 900 miles, and in a much wider area. Atom bombs can destroy human civilization. Hydrogen bombs can destroy all life on Earth. When I was your age, there were over 50,000 of these weapons on Earth. The Russians had about 30,000, mostly hydrogen, a few atomic. We had about 20,000, mostly hydrogen, a few atomic. The Brits and the French had a few dozen each. Had there been, God, thank you God, a full-scale nuclear exchange in the year I graduated from high school in 1984, not even the cockroaches would have survived. Since then, with the conclusion of the Cold War, there has been a general reduction in the numbers of nuclear weapons. So we're not talking 50,000 of them. Nuclear, by the way, is the catch-all category for both hydrogen bombs and uranium or plutonium bombs, fusion and fission bombs. I think maybe there's between 6 and 10,000 of them on the planet now. However, no one exactly knows what the Chinese are doing. The Chinese Communist Party is notoriously secretive. No one really knows whether the Iranians have a bomb yet. I'm sure they do, myself. Pakistanis have bombs. All of those bombs come from this chain. We gave the bomb to the British, and the French developed their own with sort of our help. We gave the bomb to the British because the British heavily invested in the Manhattan Project, and they really probably should have had their own bombs from the beginning. That is to the extent of our nuclear proliferation. It's also entirely likely that both the South Africans and the Israelis spied in the West and got enough atomic secrets to develop their own nuclear arsenals. South Africa has since given up its nuclear arsenal, but during the 80s, during the apartheid era, one reason South Africa was not invaded was that they had atomic weapons and they were willing to use them in defense of apartheid. The Israelis also have atomic weapons. They don't talk about them. We don't talk about them. But they had them back in 1973 during the Yom Kippur War. Had they been pushed beyond a certain point, Cairo and Damascus would have burned in atomic fire. We knew that. That's why we intervened to help the Israelis. They still have atomic weapons for defensive purposes. The Japanese could have them anytime they want. The Japanese, being the only people on Earth ever bombed with atomics, are notoriously loath to use or even to say to the world, "We've got them." I'm pretty sure, given the way China's behaved in the last 10 years, the Japanese have a working nuclear arsenal, a mixture of atomic and hydrogen weapons to defend Japan. And I'm sure they let the Chinese know they do, because otherwise the possibility of adventurism by the Chinese Communist Party is high. The South Koreans do not have nuclear weapons, but they are defended by our umbrella, so is Taiwan. That's what we have done. The only intentional one we did in terms of proliferation was Britain. However, we did help or allow those others. The Soviets developed their atomic weapons in the late 40s, and they developed their hydrogen bombs in the mid-50s. We developed ours in the early 50s. From the Soviets, the Chinese communists get atomics in the late 50s. From the Chinese communists in the mid to late 80s, the North Koreans get a hold of atomic weapons. From the North Koreans, the Pakistanis get a hold of nuclear weapons. Also, somewhere from the Soviets, probably because of the difference in opinion between the Soviets and the Chinese in the 1980s, the Indians in Asia also get atomics. So India and Pakistan go nuclear because of Russia and China. The Iranian nuclear program is a product of the Pakistani nuclear program. The Libyans had something, and they gave them up as a product of the war on terror and Gaddafi's fear that we would overthrow him. Then we let the jihadis have him. Not a great choice. So nuclear weapons have proliferated, that's the word of choice, around the world, so that there are many people who have them. From a scientific point of view, consider this. Do you really own something that you don't have the skill to produce on your own? Do you really understand it? Have you earned the right to have it? We did. The Russians did through their spying, but they also have maintained a successful nuclear program since 1949. But we now have powers that have nuclear weapons that are not restrained by those values or even the full understanding of what these weapons can do that those of us who built the weapons, societies I'm talking, have. Back in the 80s, there was a schmaltzik anti-war song called "Do the Russians Love Their Children Too?" Oh gosh, we shouldn't have war. Well, in the end, the communist atheist Russians understood that since they don't believe in God, all of their hopes reside in the planet Earth. As a result, they weren't willing to see it burn to a cinder. Push came to shove, thank God the Russians did not go nuclear when their communist system fell. I thought they would. I am still, 30 years later, surprised that at some point during the fall of Gorbachev and the rise of Yeltsin, the fall of communism, and the rise of what passed for democracy in Russia, I am still shocked that the military did not provoke a foreign war. Because in Russia, typically, as in many countries, if you have a government that's on the verge of being overthrown, you have a foreign war, everyone rallies around the flag, at least enough people do to keep you in power. I am amazed and grateful that that didn't happen. Instead, the Berlin Wall falls, the Soviet Empire falls, all without a single mushroom cloud. The problem we face now with atomic and nuclear and hydrogen weapons is that there are people who have them who did not, and whose society did not go through the historical processes that could have led to them natively. The government in India is basically an ally of ours, but it's a one-party state. It's a democracy where only one party rules, and it's a Hindu nationalist party. The Hindu nationalists and the Pakistanis have fought several wars since independence in 1947. They do not like one another at all. The Pakistanis and the Indians both have atomic weapons, which means if they go to war again, it is incredibly likely that there will be an atomic exchange on the Indian subcontinent. And that's not a place that has many empty zones. Almost everywhere on that subcontinent swarms with people. So even a small atomic interchange would probably cost millions of lives. The North Koreans are bat-nuts crazy. They really are. When the Chinese communists go, whoa, and they've done it on several occasions to the North Korean leadership. Now, North Korea and its leadership class are bat-nuts crazy. They have had atomics since the early 90s. It started developing in the mid to late 80s. We permitted it. We didn't go to war because we were afraid the Chinese would intervene. So now the Norks have atomic weapons, maybe nuclear weapons. They have missiles that can hit the United States. And their missile program, through the end of the Obama era, was testing a very particular use of nuclear weapons. Not strikes on American cities exactly, but upper atmosphere detonations. Do any of you know what upper atmosphere detonations of atomic weapons does?
Probably rain hellfire.
It's a massive electromagnetic pulse. 3 or 4 of them properly placed will blank out the entire American power grid in such a way that anything that's not shielded will take months or more likely years to repair. You take a society of over 300 million people that depends on electricity, and you blank out their power for years, millions will die. Anyone in hospitals? Gone. Anyone who needs advanced medical care? Gone, unless they're able to be taken care of by the military. People who rely upon transport for food, which is almost every city, especially in the north, gone after the first winter, or moving as refugees. It would be an act of war to do that. And if they did that, I hope we'd wipe them the hell out. But hopefully they won't. But they might gamble that if they don't hit our cities but simply blank out our power grid, they might get away with it. That's a scary prospect. Try to imagine the last time you had no power and having that go on possibly for 2 or 3 years. How would life change? Bearing in mind that you don't just have automobiles today, you have automobiles controlled by computers. In the old days, automobiles would work without your electronics. You'd need to start it somehow, but if you could start it, you'd be fine. But today, I don't know how many vehicles built after 1960 or 70 would be able to function on the roads without electrical power. Since the 1960s, there was a balance of power between American and Soviet nuclear forces. But today, not only do we have the Chinese communists in possession of nuclear weapons and a massive military, not only do we have the North Koreans, not only do we have the Indians and Pakistanis, who are vicious to one another whenever they fight, we have the Iranians, run by a theocracy, run by Islamist mullahs. And presidential politicians like Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, who was president of Iran about 20 years ago for a long time, Ahmadinejad himself was one of the hostage takers in the Iran hostage crisis of 1979 through 81. And he publicly talked about watching Israel burn in atomic fire and the purging fire of God. Now, you take a medieval worldview like that and couple it with atom bombs, and you got some seriously bad problems. So, one thing to bear in mind as we go through the story of the Cold War and the post-World War II world is that everything is done with the calculation of how do we get what we want, avoid losing what we don't want without provoking global thermonuclear war. And that's still a factor. Unfortunately or fortunately, we've got a bunch of new players who have no track record of restraint and who might be very willing to pull the trigger on the nuclear cannon. Questions, comments, thoughts? I'm not trying to make you terrified. I'm trying to make you aware. And if you have questions about this, you should ask. Yeah.
You know that whole police training thing where before they actually get to go into the force, they have to be shot with rubber bullets and tased?
I've heard of it. I don't think it's universally done, but I've heard of it.
I think it's pretty much like done in America for the most part.
Well, okay, then that's a recent phenomenon. Go on.
But basically, that might be like a similar concept, or it might be applicable to the worldwide spread of nuclear weapons. Because America has tested it so much, we have bombed our own land more than any other foreign land. There are islands that were off of Hawaii that are no longer islands. There are giant craters in the desert. Where
Look at Bikini Atoll. That makes sense. That's an interesting idea. The thing is, you're thinking about it like a civilized man. The world is not run by civilized men. For the most part, the world is run by vicious criminals. And they're not going to give up what power they can get. Unless you can imagine, say, a Los Angeles street gang giving up all their guns. Frank Herbert, last thing, in his book Dune, posited a solution to the nuclear problem. And that is an ironclad agreement that says that if anyone initiates a nuclear war, all the other countries will blast their capital. Guaranteed. And that might restrain people. The truth is, atomic weapons have kept the peace as well. Have a good day.